I've got a few questions, then we'll open it up to the audience. The show of force, I want to talk a little bit about this because I think it's important, but at the same time, we don't want to have to expose our kids to the kind of jail-like systems that you kind of mentioned, Abe. Show of force communicates a lot to people that want to do bad things, right? TSA is a show of force. If you want to get on an airplane, you can't take off your socks and your shoes, maybe not your sock, but your shoes and your belt and everything else. Police carry weapons that are visible, not only for easy access, but it's a physical deterrent. When somebody walks up to you with a gun on their hip, you have the show of force there. I would say that Donald Trump's wall is a show of force. It's not going to stop everybody from getting in, but it's communicating that we take this law seriously and we're going to do what's necessary to protect. So we're in this interesting time where I think all of us that grew up in schools where elementary schools were open and easy to access, and you just walked in because it was a neighborhood school and it's your friends and it's your community. I think those times have moved past. And we're at a place now where we need to provide a strong show of force and strong security. But you mentioned there's some ways to kind of hide the security as well. How do we balance all that? I like the idea that there's armed guards at the door of my kid's school. I think it sends a strong message. But at the same time, what are we communicating to our kids in the community as a result of that? So I don't know, I can open it up to Dawn or Laura, Abe, Denny, any of you want to speak in on that?
Wow,
Ladies
okay.
first.
Go ahead, Laura. I know you
then.
can jump in there.
Yeah, and I think that there's show of force and then there's presumption of force. And so think about a gun show where nobody's open carrying, let's just say. So you're not seeing it, but there's an assumption that if somebody wanted to go in there and commit a crime, that they would be met with force. So there's a presumption of force. And Denny mentioned we love our school resource officers, and they do more than obviously act as a show of force. But when there is a school resource officer in a school where a shooting happens, it's because the killer chose to start it somewhere else. So shouldn't we have that presumption of force sprinkled all throughout the school? And I mentioned some of the positions we've had, the school nurse and the lunch lady and the bus drivers, literally all over the school. And I think when that system is in place, when we're in more than just 34 school districts that have armed staff today in Colorado, when it's all over the place, like it is in Ohio, where it's the assumption that if you go into that school and try to do something bad, it is not going to end well for you. Then our schools will stop being soft targets. Then they will stop bringing evil to our schools. And that's going to be a dynamic change. So I think there's a show of force, and I think there's a presumption of force that could create that good balance.
So I would agree with that response. I think it's really important to frame the conversation so that everybody in this room, who I think we're all friends, we understand what's being said out there, and I think a lot of folks get this. I have a friend who's been a teacher for 20 years, and she said, I really appreciate what you're doing, but you know what, as a teacher, I didn't sign up to work in a prison. It's like, okay, interesting. And so that's what I'm hearing out there. Commissioner Thomas and I were asked to testify at the state capitol in front of the Interim School Security Committee, which the state legislature has convened throughout the summer. And we were placed on a panel with several members of the ACLU. And as we were sharing some of the solutions that we felt our committees had arrived upon, the comment from the ACLU, with all due respect, was, minority students and students with disabilities are being disproportionately targeted by SROs. So that is the dynamic that we were surprised with when we showed up at the Capitol. So I had to respectfully interject at that point, and I said, It's interesting because our school district, who I respect, we're collaborating with them, even though we're philosophically a bit different. They've decided to use their bond and mill levy money to hire about 91 counselors in Douglas County. And listen, I am all for mental health. I think counselors can be very significant, and they're doing a lot of other things which I think will also help keep kids safe. But I said, when I walked into the Capitol today, I was not met by counselors, even though maybe we could use some at the state legislature, right? You know what I was met with when I walked in the doors?
There are not enough counselors in the world.
I'm with you, John. I'm with you, John. I was not met by counselors when I walked into the Capitol. I was met by security guards and a metal detector. And there is this narrative out there that kids are afraid to go to these areas that are more secure. I have a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 2-year-old. They are not afraid when they go to Mile High, when they go to Coors Field, when they walk through the detectors at Target, even though they look different. That's exactly what they would be. So I think the kids are used to it. But the argument is, well, if you have these security measures, the kids will funnel, you can't get them through, and they're going to feel like they're in a prison. And the number one fear of students is being shot at school right now in 2019. I'm more concerned about that fear than this feeling of campus should be wide open and we just should have a free-for-all. So it's competing considerations, but just so you understand what I'm hearing on the other side, this is what we're up against.
So, and my thought is, look, it's real easy to get wrapped around the idea of a school shooting. These are low likelihood, high consequence events. We get that. But the perception by our children is, I may get shot at school, because that's the kind of press that's happening. The reality is the threat is multifaceted. How many explosive devices were there at Columbine? Anybody know? 99. 99 explosive. Now, you probably never heard about that. Had they been better bomb makers, you would have heard about it. Their goal was to burn the whole skill down and kill everybody in it, not just shoot them to death. Almost every active shooter and terrorism act that we have in this country and around the world involves explosive devices today. Now, ISIS is saying things like pick up a knife, pick up a machete, drive your car. Okay, we're missing the boat here. It isn't just about other kids shooting other kids. Now, that's important, and I'm not saying we forget about that, but there are many other threats that we have to adjust, and to do that, we have to have this multi-layered approach to getting that done. Physical security is one of those things, but eventually, one of those bad things is going to happen in our schools again. Are we going to have the people there that are trained and capable of responding to that in seconds, not minutes? Douglas County Sheriff, and I met with Tony Spurlock shortly thereafter, like 2 weeks later. Don and I did, and John Andrews was with us. You know, he loves the idea of what we're talking about with Hold Fast America. Because we're not there to be police officers. We're there to stand in the gap before the police officers can get there to protect those kids. Okay, I want all of our volunteers to have as many tools in the toolbox as possible. A firearm, it would just be one of those. Whether they carry it in an open carry or concealed, doesn't matter to me. Okay, each individual school district, each individual school can make that decision. We're currently working with 2 private schools that want us to be in uniform, open carry. We'll do that for them. But we will not look like police officers. We will not look like special agents. We will not look like military. And guess what else we won't look like? $15 an hour security guards, because that's not who we are. We're professionals. That's who we are. So we can get this done in a way that allows us to use other skills. Who's ever heard of behavioral recognition? So what does that mean? Anybody want to give me a definition of behavioral recognition? Yes, sir.
Hallmarks of psychopathology, reading the files.
Okay, so in a nutshell, for a street cop like me, and the guy that was hired to train the folks at the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey where they own the the trade centers and the train systems in New York and around the area. I want to know what's the behaviors associated with somebody that's going to start killing people. Behavioral cues, right? Facial expressions and body language, weapons cues, tactical cues, things that I can teach teachers, students at the right age, parents, as well as our volunteers to pick up on. And then how to have a conversation about drawing that information out so we can stop these things from happening way before they start to happen. Including things like, why is little Johnny being bullied? And how do we help Johnny not be bullied? And how do we talk to the bullies and make sure they know it's not in their best interest to continue down that road? Because the Secret Service just put out their report last week, right? And they said almost all of these shooters had been severely bullied at some point in their life, not just online, but face to face. So our folks will be there at every level of a school, walking the halls, talking to the kids. Hi, I'm Mr. Dillard. How you doing today, Johnny? You doing okay? Can I help you with anything? If somebody shows up to come from the outside before they get in there with that guitar case, we're going to take a look at the guitar case because we can and we will. Not because we're cops, and not because we're security guards, because we're capable, we're professionals, and we're willing, and we're going to get that job done.
And if I could just add really quick to that, Jeff, we hear a lot in the news media when we talk about this topic about what happens if we have to stop a killer. And I just want to underline what Denny's talking about. We spend a tremendous amount of time in training talking about de-escalation because almost everything that any security personnel is going to do, whether it's a school resource officer, private security, or an armed staff member, does not involve having a firearm out. Almost nothing is going to involve that. Almost everything is going to be de-escalation. And so it's the part that sometimes doesn't make the nightly news, but it's the reality of how people are trained, whether it's an armed staff member or law enforcement or military.
Don, Abe, you all have looked at physical security improvements that can take place on a school. Clint, I know you did that as well. You're welcome to speak into this. What can schools do to improve? I think Sandy Hook, he shot through. The door was locked. He shot through the side, crawled through. What are some actual physical security improvements that you're seeing from schools?
Well, the example you just gave at Sandy Hook, they have, there's different products out there. One's called Clear Armor. It basically, it's a film that goes on the window and it's bulletproof. I think I forget what the cost is, like $100 a square foot. It's not inexpensive, but if tactically applied in main thoroughfares, entry, exit ways, so on and so forth. And also classroom doors. Some schools you go through, they actually have windows in the hallways into the classrooms and external windows in the classrooms. Those are all soft projectile entry points. There's also another product that helps protect against that goes on the walls that prevents firearm penetration and also bomb explosion impacts. Those could be applied to the hallways of a school. A lot of these shooters, and I hate to share this in the public meeting, could do a lot more damage if they knew the situation with the hallways and the lack of protection within hallways of schools. I hate to go into a lot of these things because it's a public meeting and you don't want to get into kind of the trade secrets of what we do, but that's some of the things we can do.
Abe, do you want to add anything?
Yes, and I would echo that. I mean, of course, we've had phenomenal experts sharing with us these solutions, but of course we don't want to be too specific and put our kids at risk or give people other ideas. But absolutely, I mean, things that have been talked about publicly certainly include what Don just shared. And then again, like I said, there are opportunities. Part of it, I mean, if you look at the Dayton shooting, the officers were able to neutralize within 30 seconds after the guy fired his first shot, but he had a .223 caliber high capacity rifle with 100 round magazines. And that's 30 seconds was all he needed. So there were 9 people dead and about 27 others injured in 30 seconds. So virtually, 100% of school shootings are over, almost 100% in under 2 minutes, almost 100%, and about 50% are over in about 30 seconds. So they're very fast. So part of it is, yes, we need armed security, armed personnel, folks with training, but even with that training, what are we doing to make sure that rifles don't get in a guitar case? And that's, just sharing what's been on the public record. So 2 things, again, that I'm looking at is from an innovative technology standpoint. When people talk about metal detectors, the comment on the other side is, look, there's going to be funneling and a big line outside if people are going through them. And then again, people don't want to feel like they're in a prison. Great. So the new technology out there, these systems can be hidden in the walls. You don't even see them there, or they can be camouflaged. And again, you can walk through them without divesting. People aren't taking out phones, taking off belts like you would at the airport. You just walk right through. And the other big thing is making sure that a lot of folks can go through. Schools are busy, they're active. And again, the new technology has systems where 4,000 people are getting through in 13 minutes. So what I want to continue to say is, and I'm really thankful for our school board in Douglas County, they've done a lot of work for many, many years with Rich Payne to make sure that our schools are safe. And they, over time, have grown to trust us and know that we're coming alongside them to help with some of these measures. But there is this philosophical difference between a wide open school and a school that's safer. And part of it is, do we need 9 entrances that are propped open during the day? Or can some of them be fire alarm doors, right? Where, okay, you can get out in a fire or an emergency, but normally they're just locked. It's just the typical doors that say emergency, exit only. That's cheap. And that's a way to limit the number of entries. So looking at that, and then the other one again was the camera technology that can identify in a camera system people that are entering with guns and immediately text that to law enforcement. So, and real quickly, I just wanted to acknowledge Corey Nelson, who was also on our physical school security committee and spent many years before I got on board working on the Keep Our Schools Safe committee, because he has a passion as a dad and as a prosecutor to keep our kids safe. And also wanted to acknowledge Rob Williams from Ascent, who's also a wonderful dad and leader in our community.
Right. All right, at this point, we'll open up to questions. Stacy, do we have microphone? Mira will bring you a microphone. And we have some folks. Go ahead and raise your hand. Why don't you, we'll start over here.
Hey guys, great to listen to you guys. One thing I want to point out for you, Mr. Lee, between Columbine and STEM, it's very rare that you have a 2-shooter set. And, the things that we've done with law enforcement, implementing standard response protocol, implementing run, hide, fight, that was able to severely limit the casualties for that STEM shooting. I know it's still awful to lose Mr. Castillo, but, him and his 2 buddies that rushed that guy, they were trained behaviorally to meet that threat, which is a terrible burden to put it on our children. We should not be requiring them to be the ones to meet that threat. And I don't want to poo-poo physical security, but that was the behavioral things that we implemented that helped in that particular situation, right? Security is dynamic. Over on Skid Row, there's still guys growing up, and there's still guys raping out there. And there's still guys earning their badges and stopping them, right? So there's no end point for this. But I will say, and I'm a firearms instructor and a football coach at Douglas County High School, and that's a lot of fun. Go Huskies. Yeah. So, when I train people, there's kind of 2 ways. I kind of look at evaluating, whether or not they're able to do that mission. One's competency, and one's temperament, right? And I get a lot of people in my classes who, come in with their Black Rifle coffee hat and their brand new 511 tack shirt. They do not have the temperament to do that job. I will say, as far as, we haven't. Some people have talked about teachers, some people haven't, but one of the things I point out to you is that teachers do have at least half that equation, temperament, right? Probably don't have the other competency issue. And they also are very familiar with their beat, right? They're the ones who know best what the everyday dynamic is between their kids that they care very much about because they chose that profession. I wouldn't put it on any teacher who didn't want to have that mission to do it, right? But thinking about just how much more familiar they are. Another thing is STEM, and there's only a couple news outlets that decided to actually release this information, but there was a security officer who made some bad decisions at the STEM shooting, right? And that's a professional, right? That's professional, but not a professional who's super invested in those children and super invested in the school necessarily. I just would like to expand that teacher ID and see what you guys had to say about that.
Laura?
Yeah, I'd like to, thanks for that question, I appreciate it. And I'd like to address teacher competency. And when we say teacher, it is shorthand for school staffers. The numbers are that the folks that have come through Faster Colorado and Faster in Ohio, about 40% are actually teachers, 60% have some other role in the school. But we use it for shorthand a lot. So you bring up a good point that we should never impose that on somebody. The number one myth about armed staff policies around the country is, quote unquote, and it's almost the same quote all of the time, is you can't make teachers carry. And I would like to dispel that myth right now. Nobody anywhere across the country has ever said that school staff should be ever required to carry a firearm. Patently ridiculous, but we keep hearing that. So thanks for bringing that point up. And here's to the willing and able part. They're willing and they're in that hallway or classroom, but are they able? And so think about Colorado has about 9% of Colorado citizens have concealed carry permits. Is it logical to think that some of those people work in schools? Absolutely. Also consider that many of the first adopters of armed staff policies are rural schools. Lots of people who work in rural schools grew up in rural areas. They grew up around firearms. It's nothing different to them than a power drill, for example. Obviously, it takes a lot more training, but it is a normal tool for them. So by and large, the people that we see in our class, it's not a beginner class at all. But we see people with 2 to 20 years experience carrying a firearm on a daily basis, except when they're disarmed to go to work. And these are people who, and I know as a firearms instructor, you see lots of different, I get it. These are folks who seek out training because they know that they're in that position to defend life, to defend the life of other people's children. We very, very frequently see they do their required training, and then they're out with our instructors doing more training and more training and more training, which is great. So until folks have seen the class and met the people, it's stunning the level of willingness and ability that we see.
Right. Janine. Mira will bring you the microphone. Wait for the microphone so the people online can hear from you.
Thank you again. As a mother of 4 children and former PTA president and a nurse, and also I've heard a lot of hard things like external locus of control, all the firearms, all the training, but the only thing I heard on changing the kid is social and emotional learning. And I've got to say that talking about your feelings is good. I get that, social, emotional. But what we do with the Center for Relationship Education is actually change the climate of the school by teaching kids how to care for one another. It's about that family feeling. You want a prison? Okay, I get it with all the things that you don't. It doesn't have to feel like a prison, but it should feel like you belong there. It should, because the research shows that if a kid belongs to his family, he belongs to his friends, and he belongs to his school, they are very healthy. It's a precursor to as a determinant of health. So I just would like to share with all of you that we are here in Colorado, where we train teachers all over the country, and we would love to see the climate change in a school that kids are caring for one another.
That's great. Denny, maybe you want to respond to that? Or Abe? Go ahead, Abe.
Okay.
Well, I will say keep doing that, okay? What we're suggesting has nothing to do with saying that there's either or. right? We continue to do that. In fact, if I'm a grandfather, so I've got not only my 5th grade school teacher daughter-in-law, but 4 kids at an elementary school, a lot of assets in one spot. Now, I'm happy to go to that school and stand there and say good morning to every teacher and every parent and every kid and love on them, you know, because I'll take the bullet if I need to. I want my grandparents, I want my grandkids, and I want the teachers, and I want my daughter-in-law to know we can take care of you. Whether you choose to carry or not is your choice. Whether you're willing and able to do that is your choice. I want kids to be kids. I want teachers to love on their students and take care of themselves. And I want professionals like myself to be able to do the job that I've been doing for 40 years to take care of this country. And I just know that there's an awful lot of other people like me that are willing to do that, and we don't have to make it look like a prison to make that happen.
Yes, I just want to tell you, we are absolutely looking at that, and you are 100% right. Those early preventions and early indicators are so critical. We've been doing a lot of interactions with local Douglas County students that are working on sort of internal indicators and social determinants of health. I sit on the State Public Health Transformation Steering Committee. But at Thunder Ridge High School in Douglas County, there are a couple of students that have started a program called Oasis, which is literally just a dedicated space within school that has, you know, therapy dogs and the opportunity for kids to decompress. Now, some folks may say, well, that's fluff, let's do reading, writing, and arithmetic. True, but a big part of what I've been trying to do is connect with student voices and hear from what kids are going through in 2019. We did the Youth Congress at the state capitol with 40 kids from Douglas County, and I was recently at a Shepherd of the Hills church with a number of kids that just lost a friend to suicide at Arapahoe High School. And what they're telling me is, you all think it's social media and all of these other things, and the real problem is the adults. They say that, and this is definitely true in Douglas County, we're the healthiest county in the country, also the wealthiest outside of Washington, D.C. The problem is that the parents have these internalized pressures to keep up with the Joneses and project success, and then they are also transferring that expectation onto their kids in an implicit way. And so having a safety net and an outlet, a safety valve on a daily basis to express those challenges, and again, that sense of belonging and sense of community, that's why the social emotional learning piece is so critical, and we want it wrapped into the curriculum so that part of what they're doing is, it's not just feel good, it's how are you more resilient? How do you process stress? Because the stress is going to be there. But I'm so thankful for you and programs like the one you mentioned, because that's a big part of what we're looking at too. So thank you.
Great. Yes, Regina.
Address that a little bit?
Yeah, sure, Clint, go ahead.
So to your point, kind of amazing, there was a FBI Secret Service study over the course of about 20 years. There were 47 school shootings in that time frame. And since then, people will pick up that data set and slice it a different way on and review it for different things. Back in 2013, the Secret Service looked at it from the aspect of, with all of these shootings, and these were school shootings, how many people knew the shooter, and did they say something? So they call it the bystander study. And this was part of our report. So you're right, ma'am, you hear a lot of physical security and those type of things, but what was very intriguing and sad to me was that 82% of the time there was a peer that knew that the shooter was going to do what he did or she did. And over 95% of the time, they never said anything. Now, this was 10 or 15 years after those shootings, so the FBI went back 30 years to get this data. My guess is that it wasn't just 82% of the time. My guess it was probably much closer to 100% of the time. And that was before we had social media, right? So to your point, I mean, we saw this as a big cultural issue, right? What does it say in our society that a child that's going to do harm, their peer, whether it's a classmate or a sibling or somebody from work, is not willing to say something, right? I mean, it's horrible. But I think it gets to, there's a much bigger issue here, right? And physical security makes a difference. Having the right kind of folks on hand to stop a shooter make a difference. I joke that if one SRO is good, then 10 or 15 are better, right? You're not going to, these schools, Castle Rock or Castle View High School is 100,000 square feet. You can have 3 folks there with a gun. It's not going to make a difference in enough time. We need more people involved. But there is this other cultural aspect that I think that we're completely overlooking in a large picture sense, if you will.
Right. Thank you. We have time for 2 questions. Regina? And we'll do, unless there's one over here. We'll finish over here. Mira, we'll go. Thank you.
Well, my question kind of follows on what he was just talking about. You've got a political correctness factor that's being driven a lot by school districts and school boards that want to keep the numbers. They want to keep their numbers looking good. They want kids graduated regardless of of whether they belong in the school. They don't want to report incidents. So how, in the midst of all this, do you address that issue that you've got administrators and sometimes teachers, you've got the local law enforcement, and sometimes even the FBI, who knows where some of these problems are, but for a variety of different reasons, nobody handles it. So how do we, does all of this just overpower it? Do we put so many parents and protectors and so forth ourselves in the schools, or how do you address that particular political correctness issue?
It's basically the Parkland issue, right? They knew he was a problem. They kept shuffling him along without really addressing the problem. Anyone want to take that one on?
Yeah, so the answer is the law. And if you're familiar with the Claire Davis Act, obviously in state lawmakers in 2015 passed that act after a girl that was killed by a fellow student at Arapahoe High School. And what I would say is hold your school boards accountable. Under that act, basically, it's a waiver of governmental immunity on acts of school violence and allows civil lawsuits to be filed. So school districts are required to prove that they exercised reasonable care to prevent reasonably foreseeable murders, first-degree assaults, and felony sexual assaults. That's already on the books. So, before we start passing new laws, which we probably need to do, let's make sure that we're enforcing the ones that are already on the books.
Yeah, and this is about parents and grandparents. Consider, we have a lot of choice opportunity in Colorado where you send your kids to school, right? You can send them to the neighborhood school here, that one over there, the charter school here, the private school. We have a tremendous amount of choice. So consider looking at it this way. You are hiring a school to educate your children. And part of that education is that you want your child returned home alive every single day. So you as the parent, you interview your school, you talk to your school board, you talk to your principal and superintendent, what are they doing? And Regina, you bring up such a good point about what happened in Parkland. There's a book, if you're interested in all of the thousands of things that went wrong there. There's a book, I see a lot of people nodding, who have read it already. It's by Andrew Pollock, who lost his daughter Meadow at Parkland, and he just was a bulldog. He is not letting go of everything that went wrong. I tell parents, read that book. If only 2 of the 77 things that went wrong there are going wrong in your kid's school, you need to know about it, because if they are they don't want their numbers to look bad. They don't want their reports to look bad. And children are less safe because of that. That is not okay. So great question. And Andrew Pollock is not paying me to say that, but it is it's a terrifying book, but it's an amazing book to get.
All right,
Can I say one thing real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been in education for over 20 years. I was vice chair of the education committee and been dealing with school districts and state boards of education and district and departments, and they don't like to do what they're not vested in. If they don't have an interest in doing, implementing a law and complying with the law, they're not going to do it. And I've seen that over 20 years. I saw when I was in the legislature. I remember getting constituent calls and having to call the CDE across the street and have them call the district and say, how come you're not complying with the law? No, they're not going to comply with something that don't have a vested interest in. I think that the answer has to be more of when it comes to a comprehensive security plan, it's got to be site-based. It's got to include the community, it's got to include the teachers and the administration. They ought to be bought into it. And that goes with the Safe to Tell system that's been very successful. It actually came from Congressman Tom Tancredo after Columbine. and it's been modified ever since, and it's a great system. Every day, there's several calls that come in to Jeffco alone, just on the safe to tell line. It's been phenomenal. But, the answer is we're compartmentalized civilization right now. The kids, they're all walking around like this, My wife and I just got back from Israel about a month ago. And one thing we really recognize out there is the families, they're like families. Everybody's not stuck on their phone. They're actually out having a good time, talking to each other. And a lot of that, I think, is because they all have to serve in the IDF, and they're all doing behavioral recognition around them, making sure nobody's looking at their kid the wrong way. And I think a lot of that has to do with it. And I think, Denny is spot on. I think, maybe in high school, we all need to take a class in behavioral recognition, because I think that's a lifelong, value to have, and it's going to keep our society safer, because our society is becoming more and more unsafe. You're talking about the schools and the presence. The presence, will deter, an idealistic type of attacker, a terrorist, someone jihadist, that kind of person. If it's an internal, there's a kid that just wants to vindicate himself to the students that have been bullying him. He doesn't care how many people are walking around with a gun. He's going to figure a way to try to get in there and vindicate himself. So there's so many variables involved. It's got to be site-based. It's got to be continued communication. There needs to be cultural changes. People need to start, telling their kid, put your phone down. Let's eat dinner together. Let's go to church. I mean, there's all kinds of answers to the school safety issue. There's no one silver bullet. No pun intended. But I think that we all need to keep working together, because I've been hearing it for 20 years, ever since Columbine. And nothing against what we're talking about here tonight, but I heard the same things 20 years ago. And it's like we haven't learned, or we haven't really taken it serious enough to really do something about it. And, by golly, we need to do something about it, and really, come together on certain things and get it done, check that off, and let's actually work our way down the road and make our schools safer today.
Last question here.
Hi, I have a friend of mine who taught in Denver Public Schools, and she is African American, and she told me that I wanted to forward her question to the panel, and she said that why are there very few inner city school shootings, but they're all wealthy white areas? Is it, financial, that the kids actually have access to firearms, they could actually purchase them? And a second comment I wanted to make was that I have a Hispanic friend of mine whose daughter, she has two daughters in their 20s and 30s, who teach elementary school in California, and they have been approached, or it's been suggested to them, that they can carry guns. I mean, in California. I was just shocked. It just blew me away. California? Teachers packing heat? So that is what I had heard, and I wanted to ask if you thought those things were true or false. That's it. Thank you.
Answer to the last question, I'd be shocked, literally shocked and dismayed, if California is going to let all their teachers carry weapons that want to, even with or without the training. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's somebody that's learning. Are you familiar with it?
So California is the only state that I know of that has gone backward in their laws. They had previously a law very similar to Colorado's, and when we think of California, we think of Los Angeles and San Francisco, but there's a lot of rural areas in California, and many rural schools were taking advantage of that policy, but they went backwards. So with never had a problem in any of the armed schools in California, and the legislature, it's just within the last 6 months or so, went backward on that. And I think about these rural schools, and I'm not sure where your friend is, if it was a rural school, but it could have been one of those that went backward. Yeah.
So let me address the issue of firearms in the inner city. They have absolutely no problem getting firearms in the inner city. Okay, it has nothing to do with them having the money to get the firearms, a wealthy kid in the suburbs or something like that. Nothing to do with that. There's plenty of access in the state of California still, as well across the country, where they can get firearms in the inner city, and they'll continue to do so, no matter how many laws that we pass. Okay, so every gang, it's just there. It's just part of what happens. And let me just finish this by saying, even if it's not firearms, if a bad guy wants to commit a crime, interpersonal human aggression, rape, murder, something along those lines. They're going to figure out a way of doing that. 19 men got on 4 different planes on 9/11, and not one of them got on the plane with anything illegal that day. Not one. And they committed one of the most horrendous attacks in our country. So eventually, people like Claire Davis are going to find themselves face to face with a gunman or somebody with a knife, or just the willingness to kill them with their bare hands again. So are we going to protect her? Or are we going to try and teach her, if she chooses to protect herself? We got to put these layers in control so that that doesn't happen again. And unfortunately, it will. All we can do is play this continued cat and mouse game to get better and better at and stay in front of one step in front of the bad guys as best we can.
All right, thank you. We're going to wrap up with just one statement from each one of you. I'd love to know one thing that the people can do when they go home tonight or tomorrow to improve the safety at their schools. We'll start with Don. You're on the spot.
Well, I think my last statement kind of covered that already. I kind of wrapped it up already.
Have dinner with your kids?
Yeah, I mean, turn the TV off, sit down, have dinner with the kids, talk to them, make sure that they don't take their phone to bed with them and they're up till 2 a.m. texting their friends, being bullied, cyberbullied. I mean, there's all kinds of, the teen suicide rate is phenomenal. It's always been a phenomenal problem, especially here in Colorado. There's more than just the violence, student-to-student violence. It's a cultural shift, and just start with hugging your kid and listening to them and trying to engage them.
Be an active and engaged parent. All right, Laura.
Same, active and engaged parent. Find out what's going on at your kids' school. They are your children. You are hiring a school to teach them and return them home alive every single day. It is your job to know what's going on. If you hear from your principal, your superintendent, your school board members that don't worry, we've got some PhDs who know what's going on, sure, it is your right and responsibility to direct the upbringing and education of your children. Ask the questions. They owe you the answers. They work for you.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Abe?
Well, I realize I'm in government, but first and foremost, I'd say pray. You got to pray. We're up against satanic forces, and we've got to focus there. But what you're doing is the right thing. You're here. You're spending your evening with us because you care. Your parents, your grandparents, you're engaged. So hold your school districts accountable. Ask them, do they have a plan in place consistent with Senator Tom Weems' 2008 bill that said they have to have a NIMS coordinated plan? I mean, it has to already be in place. So make sure that your kids and grandkids are in a school district or at a school that has a plan. And then volunteer to be a watchdog dad. Volunteer to use your know-how and expertise as an American to show up in these schools and help out. It's your tax dollars. They're not the boss, you are. So that's what I would say.
Let's get organized and work together. This is a call to action. I can't tell you one little thing that you can do, especially since I don't know any of you individually, but I can tell you, you're welcome to give me a call, and we can sit down and we can talk about it, and we take all the skills and expertise and the critical thought that we can all put in this and work together, and we can make a change if we do that.
Great. So we've heard a lot of good ideas, but I think the overall arching theme is that we need to be involved in our communities. We need to be involved in our schools. We need to be involved in our families. We need to hold our school boards accountable. We need to be present on our school campuses. We need to be there with our children and grandchildren. This is one of the big challenges we face, Denny, in our lifetime. We have, as Americans, before rised up to take on these issues, and I think we can do it again. But can we give all of our speakers a round of applause for their work tonight? Thank you all very much.